for artists and creatives, getting on a stage is actually easier to do because you suddenly are presenting yourself in a very formal way that isn't quite as personal as sharing in the moments that most of we have, which is when somebody walks into your space and they just want to know what you're doing. And we get sometimes flustered. So for us, here are some of the things that, that can help get through that. For sure, trying to imagine this stuff going well does really help. Imagining, you know, you being incredibly articulate and passionate and fabulous is a bonus. But writing down what you want to say, so imagining your wow, how, now, little elevator pitch, write it down. It doesn't mean that you have to say those words, but to write down 3 sentences that are what you would love to say in the best case scenario when somebody happens upon you and you're asked to explain who you are in 30 seconds or less. And then practice the heck out of it because you don't want to sound scripted. I mean, whether you appreciated the guy's song or not, he was very genuine and he didn't sound scripted to me. He sounded like he was telling a story. He had told it more than once, but he didn't sound like he was reading. And that is one of the key things that is hard for us, is to get from the place where you've written it down and you've practiced it, but for it to just sound natural and to really say who it is that you are. When you're doing a longer presentation, sometimes having slides can help because it helps give some visuals to your words. And so for me, when I present, I love to have a slide because it gives me something to point at and take a moment to look at my slide and remind what that slide, why I picked it. This one doesn't have an image on it at all. This was not a good pick on my part. But it does have a list that I can refer to. So if I forget what I'm trying to say, there it is. And how nice that I can remind myself and cue myself back into where I was going, which was to know your audience. And that's part of how all of this starts to become more natural, is by learning to read the cues of who people are. And that's the hard part. You sort of have to ask them questions too, which is another great way to help make your presentations even better, particularly when they're the personal ones, is to ask people what they do. Because then all of a sudden, you're in control of the conversation a little bit more. Now it's on them to share what they're doing, and you have the time while you're listening to them to think about, oh, well, they make stuff out of wood too. I've got a lot that I can share with them. And that gave you a little moment to breathe and think about how you can relate to them so that it doesn't sound so scripted. The other thing that we'll get to a little bit later, but that ultimately is really helpful, not so relevant when you're just meeting somebody, but knowing whenever you're making a presentation what you want people to do afterwards. If you want them to do nothing, that is totally fine. But in most cases, we want people to do something. We either want them to be our friend, we want them to buy what we have, we want them to collaborate with us, we want to learn from them, we want them to share knowledge with us. All of those things are going to be different depending on what the presentation is, but knowing what you want them to feel about you and what you want is really helpful because it helps you figure out how to express that without even overtly asking. And then this is like the magic part that, you know, just comes with practice, 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 which is knowing when you need to shut up and when you haven't said enough. And some of that just takes time and really good listening and observational skills on your part, because you can tell when people start to look away and are no longer paying attention, and then you change the slide. And then you breathe. So when you're getting ready to make a presentation, this one seems like the easiest thing in the world, and that everyone tells you is to breathe before you start a presentation. And it's amazing how much that actually makes a difference, even though we're always breathing all the time. But I do, right before I start to talk, I just sort of take a deep breath and clear my head for a moment, because when you slow your breathing down, everybody's breathing follows. It's kind of a weird Zen master trick. But when you stop, when you're not hyperventilating, people's energy level slows with you, and you can feel like people are starting to feel a little tired now because we're not talking so fast and I'm breathing differently. So it's amazing how much just using your breath to calm yourself so that you don't seem agitated in that presentation makes a difference. And then this, I know some of this, it just sounds so simple, and it's not, because it takes practice, but is how to make this all seem natural when we do it, because we sort of get outside of ourselves when we make presentations, and sometimes that can seem affected, it seems unnatural, and so getting comfortable with your story and being able to tell it as you, and you as your best self, is part of the key. Eye contact. Has everybody heard this one? Make eye contact for obvious reasons. It's the key into our soul, Steve, right? I can see right in. Using vocal range. This is another little trick that, again, just comes with practice, but speaking quieter and loudly, having some modulation to your voice makes a big difference. There's some really interesting trends about how we use our voice and how we end our sentences. Have you heard? I see nodding heads. Have you noticed that there's a lot of, there seems to be a generation that is starting to end their sentences with a question, even when it's a comment? And that vocal cue, for those of us who grew up with this, you sort of let your voice go down when you end a sentence, is what seems like how you know that someone's done talking and that it isn't a question. Well, there's this new United Statesian, I guess it's beyond a trend. What would you call it? It's a social custom, yes. If the Oxford English Dictionary had pronunciation and cadence of sentences, this would be a new one that was in there, which is to end things with your voice up. And the problem with that, for a lot of people in the business world and those of us who are older than, say, 40, is that when we hear a voice go up, we think you're asking a question. And so for younger people who are engaging with folks and their voice is going up as if they're asking a question, but they're not asking a question, it's confusing. So understanding how you use your voice and knowing what makes you sound confident and sure of yourself. If you sound like you're asking a question all the time, it makes you seem unsure. So that has a big difference. Mona is shaking her head. I bet you see that in the store.
Annoying.
Yeah. Well, do customers get confused?
Yes.
That's a question.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. And I don't think there's any study that says why that has started to occur. I don't know what it's about. But it's really interesting to think about how you use your voice and the tone of it to present a particular mood and feeling about yourself. We did some of this stuff in our last video that was all fake, right? From last week. Plant your feet. So on page 15 and 16, by the way, before 15 and 16 on page 13 and 14, there's a nice article that I think is really good that isn't me talking about how to think about your presentations and what tips to think about in the big picture. But what we're going to do now is for each of you, if you can do a little bit of writing about yourself. What's your fear about presenting? What can you do about overcoming it if you have some fears? And then on page 16, there's a little quiz that helps you think about how you're presenting now. And this is for you. You're not handing this in. But just to think about How are you thinking about presentations? Do you use the fear in a good way? Are you using eye contact? All those different things. So take the next 5 minutes, do some writing, go ahead and get yourself through this self-assessment so that you can actually be starting to figure out what you need help with related to presentations. Okay?